helps you leverage this other part over here. Because guess what? When you take the surface area of all these people who contribute very little, but do contribute every once in a while, the surface area is just as big as this one over here. And what we're seeing on the internet is that technologies are facilitating people being able to leverage these contributors. And I'm going to talk about a couple of strategies for collective intelligence that we do to leverage that group of active participants and lurkers. So if we go back to our original graph, we saw, of course, contributors and leaders add the most amount of value to our organization. But then when we think about it from a collective intelligence perspective, we think, actually, this guy or this person doesn't contribute very much. But there's 200 of them. Okay? This person, there's 100 of them, and they contribute a little bit more. And here, maybe there's 5, and then there's 1. So when you use strategies for collective intelligence, which is, I'm going to show you how that works, you can end up taking these 200 people and aggregating what it is that they do in a smart way so that you can have them add as much value to your organization as these other people at the top, which are kind of the easy targets for communities. So what is collective intelligence? So it's kind of a buzzword for sure. Although it's historically it's got its antecedents are previous to World War II, but it's essentially it's a group of people working together with no centralized authority. I mean, this is one of the things that we heard in the previous presentation. There was an interesting book called Smart Mobs by this person named Howard Rheingold. People studying ants and flocks of birds and how those groups behave intelligently, whereas an ant might be stupid individually, they're very smart as a group. And the benefit that we're starting to see is that, and this is documented well in a book called Wisdom of Crowds, is that there's large groups of peers are actually more effective at solving complex problems than small groups of peers. And related to the earlier presentation, it's a matter of experience. If you take all the people's experience in this room and all the perspective in this room and you bring it together, you're going to have better insight than if you only took it for me and the 2 other presenters. Because cumulatively, you folks have way more experience and way more perspective than us 3, subject matter experts. And it's related to the long tail, right? So as I mentioned. And one of the emerging understandings, too, is that it can cost less. Because instead of trying to codify what it is that your people know, you have to try and facilitate it. Right? So imagine if we tried to take everything that people knew and tried to write it down. That would just be impossible. We'd never think about it. Well, some people do, actually. We talked about people doing exit interviews, trying to write it down. But if you tried to do that for everyone, it would be super expensive. So here's how Gartner looks at this. Gartner is a well-recognized IT firm, and this is how they look at collective intelligence. This is similar to some of the stuff that I talked about before, but the most important part is that they see this as a real transformation inside organizations. They see it as something that's going to have a major impact on our institutions from inside out. So let's use an example. This is a real world example from one of the communities that we work with, an Army community, as to why many peers are better than a few experts. So this is a story about a woman whose name is Stephanie Gray, and she's a soldier in Iraq. And she has a fallen soldier, and she doesn't know what to do about it. So she connects with Nate and Tony, who through their social networks connect to Pete, Ray, and John, who through their social networks connect with a bunch of other folks, who then come back to Stephanie in a very short period of time. The cycle for this process that happened was about 1 or 2 days. And Stephanie ends up getting the perspective of 3 different people, steep in experience, coming from different angles. So otherwise, in her organization, she may have asked one person, hey, what do I do in this situation? Then they tell them. In this case, you can see that within a short period of time, she's able to aggregate a broader number of people to give her the perspective and the experience she needs to make the right decision. Now, this is one example of collective wisdom. And I'm going to show you a bunch more, or a few more. And I'm going to do it in the form of what can be, as organizations, what can be some of our strategies for harnessing collective intelligence. So what do we do about it? One of the tenets of collective intelligence is the importance of diversity of perspective. And the idea is that you get better answers if you have more perspectives around the table and there's more diversity. So this is a screenshot of our application, Tomoye 1.6, and this is just to give you an example of how collective intelligence can be embedded into applications and what it means for us as regular people. So from a diversity perspective, you can see that this is a standard object that you would see in most content management systems or document management systems inside your enterprise. And the content that you see here is the content that was added by the contributor. So this is what this person thought were the community facilitator tips and tricks at the US Army. Then you can see up here on the top that you've got something called ranking. And ranking is basically an aggregate of how people use the objects inside the system. And what it does is it aggregates all the utilization of all the different things that people do in the system as value indicators, and then gives it a rank out of all the items in the system. That's the lurker perspective. Okay, so that's the people who aren't adding anything. Then you've got rating up here, which is the active participant perspective. So someone who comes in and writes a review says, hey, this best practice was pretty good, but when I applied it to my local context, it didn't work out so well. As you scroll down the page, you see a couple of other different perspectives. You see, once again, the active participant perspective. So most people, when they see an object in the system or they go to a community, they want to ask a question. So here's a spot where this person is asking a question, and that's the active participant perspective. Down here below, you see cross-reference items. So this is cross-reference to a knowledge object. This is cross-reference to a discussion. And this is cross-reference to other individuals that might be resources. Now, this is the leader perspective. So a community leader comes in and provides this perspective and say, hey, if you have any other questions, follow this path. Now, if we keep going in the comments tab, and this is all the same object, so you're starting to get a sense for that objects are actually aggregators of this collective intelligence, right? So when you're looking at a document inside your organization, you're not looking at the document anymore. You're looking at how people interact with the document, how people like it or dislike it, questions that people have on it, comments that people have on it. Oh, I found this interesting, and it was very transferable. So when you bring it back to our original diagram, you see kind of how it works. That in that particular example, you only had one leader, right? The person who did the linking. You only had one contributor, okay? The person who added that. But you had a few extra active participants, people that put the context around it so that people could understand how to use it. And you actually had many lurkers that gave you a sense for whether or not this is something that people actually are interested in.